Hello everyone, this is Andrew, and I've made for you a presentation about the simple future. So we are going to be looking at two forms of the simple future, will and be going to. So I'm going to show you how to form sentences using will and be going to. Also, we're going to look at in which situations we should use will and which situations we should use be going to. So we're going to use those in different situations. We'll look at that, and then at the end we'll do some practice, a little bit of review, just to make sure that you understood everything. So let's take a look and get started with the simple future. The first question that we need to answer is, which do I use? So will and be going to may seem exactly the same, but they're not. They're both used in different situations depending on the message that is trying to be expressed. Or in other words, it depends on what you're trying to say. So depending on what you're saying, you might use will or you might use be going to. So we're going to look at when should we use which one. And also the forms or the structures are also different. So how we write sentences using these two is going to change a little bit. So we'll take a look at all of that in this presentation. Let's start with will. Here we have the form of will. So how do we write out will and put it into a sentence? So it's actually pretty simple. All we do is take the word will, and then right after we put the verb, whatever verb we are using in the sentence. And that verb is going to be in the infinitive. So nothing changed to it, just run, jump, swim, whatever. In this case, in this example, we have help. So looking at this first example, the affirmative, or the positive, you is our subject, and then right after we have will, and next is the verb, in this case help. You will help. And then the rest of the sentence that follows, in this case him later. You will help him later. That would be the affirmative. Looking at the negative, all we do is add the word not. And the word not is going to go in between will and help. So right in the middle there, we put our negative word not. You will not help him later. And looking at the interrogative, so what we do is take the word you will and switch them around. We change the place. It's very similar to using does in the present tense. Like he does becomes does he, or you do becomes do you. So it's the same thing as that, but just with will you. You will in the affirmative, we change the order and it becomes will you help him later in the interrogative. So that's how you form will in the affirmative, negative, and interrogative. Here we have some contractions of will. So a contraction is just taking two words and putting them together to make one word. And we can do this with the word will and all of our subject pronouns. So on the left, going down, you can see all of the subject pronouns. I, you, she, he, it, we, and they. So we can take those pronouns and put them together with will. And at the very bottom, you can see will is contracted to apostrophe LL. So what we do is we get rid, or we take away, the W and the I in will, and that's replaced by the apostrophe, this little comma up in the air. So the W and the I is replaced by that, and we keep the LL. So what we're going to do is take the pronoun and the apostrophe LL and put them together. So I will becomes I apostrophe LL. You will becomes you apostrophe LL. So that's how we form it. And the pronunciation can be a little bit difficult. So I'm going to go down and say all of them for you. And just pay attention to the pronunciation because it can be a little tricky. So we have I'll sing, I'll, you'll sing, you'll, she'll sing, she'll, he'll sing, hull, it'll sing, it'll, we'll sing, wool, and they'll sing, they'll. So these are very difficult. They don't sound like they look, and that makes it very hard to just read it and try to say it perfectly. But just practice that a little bit, and eventually it'll sound a lot better. So here we have the negative contraction with will. So it's totally fine to say will and not for the negative in the simple future. But it's a lot more common to make that a contraction into one word. And so the combination of will and not, it comes out won't. W-O-N apostrophe T. So this one's a little bit trickier, but you'll hear and see this all the time in English, won't. So we have Garfield here, Garfield the cat, and he says, I can, but I won't, or I will not. So he's being very lazy, and he's saying he won't do these things. He can, but he won't. So that's enough of will. Now let's move on and take a look at be going to. First we'll look at the form of be going to, how to put it together in a sentence. So of course we start with the verb to be, and that's either going to be am, is, or are, depending on the subject, right? I am, you are, he, she, it is, that sort of thing. So whatever the subject is, we change the verb to be, and then we keep going to, always the same, and right after that is the verb, and that's going to be in the infinitive as well. Just like with will, we don't change that verb. No ed, no ing, just keep it in the infinitive. So if we look at this first example in the affirmative, or the positive, it says he is our subject, third person singular, right? So our verb to be is going to become is. He is, and then we just plug in going to. He is going to, and the verb in this case is study. So we keep study in the infinitive. He is going to study a lot this year. So that's how you would do the affirmative. The negative is almost the same, but we just add the word not, our negative word not, and that's going to go after the verb to be. So he is not going to study a lot this year. Or, of course, we could use a contraction, he isn't going to study a lot this year. And then the interrogative, again, we're going to change the word order. He is going to switch or change to is he. So we just change the order of those two words for the question. Is he going to study a lot this year? And that's how we would form be going to. Just a little side note about going to. So sometimes native English speakers will shorten going to gonna. You'll see and hear this word gonna a lot. And even though it is quite common, this spelling and pronunciation is very informal, and it's not proper English. Um, so for formal situations like school, when you're doing homework and school assignments, anything like that, you always want to write and say going to. Actually spell it out and say it properly. Gonna should be used more in casual or informal situations. Like if you're chatting with your friends or typing online, you'll see gonna a lot on the internet. So I just wanted to tell you about it so you know that it really does just mean going to, just kind of a casual and informal version of that. So now that we've looked at the forms of will and be going to, how to put them together, we need to decide in which situation do we use each one. So which is which? So I've made a Venn diagram here. On the left, we have the situations that we use will. So that's going to be voluntary actions and promises. And we're going to look into these in detail in just a second here. I just wanted to lay them out for you before we begin. So will we use for voluntary actions and promises. Moving over to the right, we have be going to, and we use that for plans, to talk about future plans. And then actually for predictions in the middle, we can use both. For predictions about the future, we can use will or be going to, and both are fine. So now let's look at each of these individually in a little bit more detail. So let's start with voluntary actions with will. So using will often suggests that the speaker will do something voluntarily. And voluntarily just means that you're offering to do it for someone else. Like you're choosing to help them or just do something for them. It's just like in natural science, the voluntary actions are the ones that you have to think about and choose to do. Like lifting your arm or kicking out your leg is a voluntary action. So you're choosing to do it. And in this case, we want to use will for that. So if someone complains to you or asks for your help, when we answer them, it's very common to use will. And also when you're the one asking for help. So any sort of like asking for someone to voluntarily help you, it's best to use will. And we'll see an example of that. We will also use will not or won't when saying no to someone. So that's just the negative form. Whenever we're saying no to that person, like we won't help them, we use will not or won't. So let's look at a few examples of that. So let's take a look at some examples of using will in voluntary actions. The first one, we have, I will send you the information. So this person, the speaker, is choosing voluntarily to send the other person information. So in this case, we want to use the future tense. Not the present tense, but the future tense. Even if he sends it in the very near future, like in just a minute, we still need to use the future tense with will. I will send you the information. We can also look at a negative example, like the second one. I will not give it to you. So in this one, we're using the negative, and again, we're voluntarily choosing to not give something to someone else. And even though it's happening in the present, we're talking about the future. So I will not give it to you. Now, for the other three examples, we have little conversations, like person A and person B. So person A says, will you help me with my homework? So again, he's asking for something, and in that case, you want to use will, and in the question and the answer, because person B responds, yes, I will. So that's how that would sound. Even though it's all happening in the present, and we're not talking about something very, very far in the future, we still use the future tense with will, and not the present tense. So, will you help me with my homework? Yes, I will. So in the next example, this person is kind of complaining. I'm so hungry. And then for the answer of that, you would want to use the future because you're voluntarily choosing to help him with his hunger problem. So, I'm so hungry, you would say, I'll make you a sandwich, or I will make you a sandwich. And the last example, the first person, person A, says, the phone is ringing, and person B answers, I'll get it. I will get it. So the the first person, told them that the phone was ringing, and then person B is voluntarily choosing to help them and go get the phone. And so for that, we need to use future tense with will. I will get it. Now let's look at the second situation that we can use will, and that is with promises. So will is usually used in promises. Um, so these are just things that we're promising to do in the future. And anytime we're talking about a promise, even if it's way in the future or in just a few minutes, we still want to use the future tense with will. So let's look at some examples of um, promises using will. So in this first example, it says, I will call you when I arrive. So the speaker, whenever he gets to where he's going, he's promising the person that he's talking to that he will call them. And this is happening in the future. So, and he's promising to do it. So we want to use will in that case. I will or I'll call you when I arrive. It's happening in the future and he's promising to do something. So we'll use will for that. In the second example, it says, don't worry, I'll be careful. So again, the speaker is promising whoever they're talking to that they will be careful and cautious and not do something crazy or silly, that they will be careful. So they're making that promise to them about the future, about being careful, so you want to use will. I will be careful. And in the third example, it says, I promise I will not tell him about the surprise party. So in this example, it actually says, I promise. So quite easy to recognize that this is a promise. And in that case, of course, we are going to use will. This is a negative example because he's talking about not telling about the surprise party. He doesn't want to ruin the surprise. So he's using the negative future, I will not tell him about the surprise party. So in all of these examples, we're promising something about the future, so we need to use the future simple with will. So be very careful because the way that voluntary actions and promises, those two examples that we just looked at, those are expressed very differently in English and in Spanish. So I just wanted to bring this to your attention because it's a very common mistake, one that I've seen a lot, especially with Spanish speakers learning English. So let's just take a look at this situation in the two languages to really tell the difference. So in Spanish, it is common to use the present simple in these two situations. Like if you were doing a voluntary action, you could say, te hago un sándwich, right, in the present tense. Or if you're promising something in the future, you still would use the present, te llamo luego. But that's in Spanish. In English, it's very different. Like we just saw, we have to use the future tense with will in those same situations. So we would not say, I make you a sandwich. Like in Spanish, we would say, I will or I'll make you a sandwich, using the future tense. Even though we're talking about something that's about to happen in the present, we still use the future. Same thing with the promise. We don't say, I call you later. We would say, I will call you later, or I'll call you later. So just be careful and try to avoid translating directly from Spanish to English because in situations like this, it doesn't work and you'll end up sounding kind of funny if you say, I make you a sandwich or I call you later because we need to use will. I'll make you a sandwich, or I'll call you later. So just be careful with that. All right, so that was the situations that we use will. So now let's look at a situation that we use be going to. And this is going to be expressing plans. So, in other words, it expresses the idea that the speaker intends to do something in the future. Just something, a plan is just something that the speaker is going to do in the future. He's planning on doing it. And it does not matter if this plan is possible or realistic or not. It could be something crazy, a ridiculous plan, but we still use be going to for things that we're planning on doing in the future. So let's take a look at a couple examples of that. In the first example, it says, he is going to travel to Hawaii this year. So whoever the sentence is talking about, he has a plan to go to Hawaii. He has his airline ticket, he has his hotel reservation, his bags are packed, and he's going to Hawaii. So this is something that's planned, and for those plans, it sounds a lot better to use be going to. So he is going to travel. In the second example, it says, she is not going to go to France this year. So again, this is a plan to not go to France. Even though it's negative, it's still a plan. So again, we just would want to use is because our subject is third person singular, she. She is. Right after is, we put not, and then just the rest of the sentence. Going to go to France this year. And we have a little conversation here for the third example. Person A says, when are we going to meet tonight? So they're talking about a plan. They obviously have a plan to meet, and the person is wondering at what time they're going to meet. And then person B uses the same form, going to answer the question about the plan. We are going to meet at 6 p.m. So anytime we're talking about these plans, whether it's the question or the answer, we want to use be going to. So when are we going to meet tonight? We're going to meet at 6 p.m. And let's see, below that we have another example of a plan. This is a plan of what they want to be when they grow up, like their career or their job. And the speaker says, I am going to be an actor when I grow up. That's his plan. Even if it's unlikely or unrealistic, it's still what he's planning on doing. So he's going to use be going to. I am going to become an actor. And the last example, I am going to start exercising more. So again, this is a more realistic plan, something that this person has control over. And they're planning on exercising more. So we would say, I am going to start exercising more. So these are some examples of how we can use be going to when we're talking about future plans. And finally, we have a situation in which we can use will or be going to. Both of them are fine. And this situation is expressing predictions. So both will and be going to can be used to talk about general predictions about the future. And a prediction is just a guess about what might happen in the future, just kind of guessing about what could happen later on. And in these sentences, the subject usually has little control over the future. So that's what makes this different from a plan. A plan you have control over. You can plan your own life. But when we're just talking about things that are out of our control, we're just guessing. And that's just a prediction. And in that situation, it's okay to use will or be going to. So the meaning of the sentence will not change. So both are fine. So let's look at a few examples of these predictions in which we can use either will or be going to. So in the first one, the first little couple, the meaning does not change in either one. we could either say the year 2021 is going to be very interesting, or the year 2021 will be very interesting. So we don't really have any control over 2021. We don't have a lot of control over if it will be interesting or not. We're just guessing. We're just predicting that it will be, or it's going to be. So we can use either of those two forms. In the second example, we're talking about who's going to be the next president. And again, we only have one vote. We can't really control or say who will be the next president. So it's just a prediction. We're just guessing about who will be the next president. So we can use both. We can say Jim Brown is going to be the next president, or Jim Brown will be the next president. And finally, in the last example, we're talking about a movie winning awards. Again, I can't decide who wins the Oscar all by myself. I can just guess and predict about what movie will win an award. So in that case, I can use be going to or will. Both are fine. This movie is going to win many awards, or this movie will win many awards. So when we're making these sort of predictions about the future, then either one is fine. Be going to or will. So now that we've seen how to form both of these types of simple future, and also in what situations to use them in, let's go ahead and review and do a couple practice questions together. So in this first one, this person is saying, "I'm hungry." So what would you say to that person? How would you answer this question, or kind of, well, not a question, but complaint? How would you respond to him? If he says, "I'm hungry," would you say, "I make you a sandwich," "I'll make you a sandwich," "I'm going to make you a sandwich," or "a sandwich I be making you"? So think about that for a second. You can pause it if you need some time. And when you have your answer, go ahead and move on to the next slide. So if you said B, you are correct. I'll make you a sandwich. So this person is complaining that he's hungry, and we are voluntarily choosing to help him and to make him a sandwich. So remember, in those voluntary actions, something you choose to do, we need to use will. So I will or I'll make you a sandwich. We don't want to use A, the present tense, and we don't want to use going to, because it's not really a plan, but more of a voluntary action. And D just makes no sense. So this one is definitely B. So if you said B, good job. So let's move on to another example. So this girl is saying, "Please don't tell anyone my secret." So she doesn't want you going around and telling anybody her secret. So what would you say to her? Would you say, "Don't worry, I promise I don't"? Would you say, "Don't worry, I promise I won't"? Or C, "Don't worry, I promise I will"? Or D, "Don't worry, I promise I am not going to"? So if you're promising her something, what would we want to use? So think about that. Pause it for a second if you need to, and when you're ready, move on to the next slide. So if you said B, you are correct. Don't worry, I promise I won't. So remember, when we promise things, we always want to use the future tense with will. In this case, it's negative because you're saying that you will not tell the secret. So will not can be contracted to won't, remember. So I won't would be the negative of will. And that's what we want to use for these promises is will. So don't worry, I won't. We have another example here. This girl is asking, "What are your plans for the weekend?" So she's asking you about your plans. So what would be the best answer if she's asking you what you're planning on doing over the weekend? Would you say, I will ride my bike, I am going to ride my bike, I ride my bike, or I go to ride my bike? So think about that, and when you're ready, move on to the next slide. If you said B again, then you are correct. In this case, when we're talking about plans, we want to use be going to. So that's why we don't want to use will or just the present simple. We want to use the future with be going to talk about something we're planning on doing. In this case, riding our bike. So again, be, I'm going to ride my bike. In the last example here, we have some Spanish football fans, and they're asking you, what do you think about the next World Cup? So they're asking you a kind of prediction, like a guess, about what could happen in the next World Cup. So which makes the most sense to answer that? I think Spain will win. I think Spain wins. I think Spain is going to win. Or I think Spain does win. And in this question, there are two answers. So two of these answers are correct, and two of these answers are incorrect. So think about it for a second and decide which two answers make the most sense to talk about a future prediction. So think about that and move on to the next slide when you're ready. If you said A and C, then you are correct. So remember, for future predictions, we can use either will or be going to. And we don't really know, we don't have any control over who wins the next World Cup, but we can guess about who's going to win. And for those guesses, we can use will or be going to. So either I think Spain will win or I think Spain is going to win are totally fine. You can use both of those to talk about your prediction for the future. So if you said A or C, good job. So that's the end of the presentation. That's all I've got for you. I enjoyed it and learned something about using will and be going to in the simple future. So thanks for paying attention, and I'll see you next time. Bye.